The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with angry voices. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in floating chairs that moved around the massive dome. Their translator devices worked overtime as each species shouted in their own language. But they all said the same thing. The human plan was crazy. Commander Tejo stood in the center of the hall. His dark eyes looked straight ahead as alien voices called his people monsters. His black uniform was clean and pressed, but his face showed the weight of sleepless nights. He had been planning this moment for weeks. You want to use civilians? As bait! The Centauri ambassador's blue skin turned darker with anger. Your own people. That is not warfare, hissed the snake-like Veltar representative. That is madness. Tejo did not move. He had heard worse words in his 40 years of service. The humans had always been different from the other races. While aliens built bigger ships and stronger weapons, humans learned to think in ways that surprised everyone. High above in the viewing gallery, Sora watched her former lover face the council alone. Her heart ached for him, but she knew better than anyone that Tejo never did anything without a reason. 5 years ago, everyone said his plan to save Kepler-7 was impossible, but he had saved her homeworld by doing exactly what the enemy did not expect. The Void Swarm had been eating star systems for 2 years now. 3 entire worlds were gone, along with billions of lives. The aliens tried everything: massive fleets, defensive lines, even running away. Nothing worked. The swarm just kept coming, learning from each battle and getting stronger. The defense of Rigel Prime failed because you followed standard tactics, Tejo said. His voice was calm and steady. The battle at Wolf 359 was lost the same way. Every time we do what they expect, we lose. So your answer is to throw away innocent lives? The hegemony's representative stood up, his forearms waving. There are families on those colony ships. Yes, Tejo said simply. There are families. And if we keep fighting the old way, all those families will die anyway, along with everyone else. The hall erupted in angry shouts again. Some aliens called for humans to be removed from the war planning. Others said humans should not be trusted with any military decisions. In a small office behind the main hall, Jiwoo stared at her computer screen. The young analyst had been studying swarm attack patterns for months. What she found made her stomach turn cold. The patterns were changing. The swarm was not just eating planets anymore. They were learning from every battle. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as she pulled up battle reports from the last 6 months. The swarm had started by attacking randomly, but now they were choosing targets that made sense. They hit supply lines first, then communication centers, then defensive positions. They were fighting like a real army now, not just hungry animals. They know what we're going to do before we do it, she whispered to herself. Back in the main hall, the vote was starting. One by one, the alien representatives voted to keep humans out of the defense planning for the next battle at Kepler Junction. The vote was not close. Only 3 species voted with the humans. Tejo watched the results appear on the main screen. He had expected this. The aliens were scared, and scared people always chose what felt safe, even when safe meant certain death. The council has spoken, announced the Archon, the ancient being who led the sessions. Humans will not participate in strategic planning for the defense of Kepler Junction. This session is closed. As the aliens filed out of the hall, Sora made her way down to the main floor. She found Tejo standing alone, looking at the tactical display that showed the swarm's advance. They think you've lost your mind, she said softly. Maybe I have. Tejo turned to look at her. For just a moment, his hard mask slipped, and she saw the tired man underneath. But losing our minds might be the only way to win this war. The colony ships you want to use as bait, there are children on those ships. I know. Tejo's voice was barely a whisper. I have nightmares about those children. But if we don't do this, those children die anyway, along with every other child in the galaxy. Sora wanted to argue with him to find another way, but she had seen the reports too. The swarm was getting smarter with each battle. Soon they would be too smart to beat with normal tactics. What do you need from me? She asked. Keep watching. Keep listening. When the Kepler Junction falls, and it will fall, Make sure our people are ready to move." Jiwoo burst into the hall, her tablet in her hands and panic in her eyes. "Commander, I need to show you something." Taeho took the tablet and studied the data. His face grew darker with each line he read. "How certain are you about this?" 97% certain, sir. The swarm isn't just learning our tactics. They're predicting them. The attack on Kepler Junction isn't going to be a battle, it's going to be a slaughter." Sora looked between them. "How long do we have?" 3 days, Jiwoo said. "Maybe less." Taeho handed back the tablet and straightened his uniform. "Then we start now. Send word to all human colonies. Operation Madness begins immediately." "That's really what you're calling it?" Sora asked. Taeho smiled for the first time in weeks, but it was not a happy smile. "If they want to call it madness, then let's give them madness. The kind of madness that wins wars." As they walked out of the empty council hall, none of them knew that in the dark space between stars, the void swarm was already moving toward Kepler Junction. Their scout ships had detected the massive alien fleet gathering there. The swarm's collective mind was pleased. Soon they would feed again and grow stronger. But the swarm had not detected the small human ships moving quietly through the outer systems. Ships that looked like they were running away in panic. Ships that were actually the first pieces of a plan so crazy that even humans called it madness. The war for the galaxy's survival was about to begin. And for the first time in millions of years, the void swarm was about to face an enemy that refused to play by the rules. The evacuation of Frontier Station looked like chaos to anyone watching. Families ran toward transport ships with whatever they could carry. Children cried as their parents pushed them onto vessels that seemed barely safe to fly. Emergency lights flashed red across the station's docking bays. Captain Do-hyun watched the evacuation from the bridge of his ship, the Rising Sun. To most people, this looked like panic. But Do-hyun knew better. Every family that seemed to be running in fear was actually following a careful plan. Every ship that looked like it was fleeing randomly was going exactly where it needed to go. "Sir, the Morning Star is requesting permission to jump," his communications officer reported. "Tell them to wait 30 seconds, then go," Do-hyun replied. "Make sure they use the modified engines." Down in the engineering bay of the Rising Sun, Hee-jin was making final adjustments to the jump drive. Her hands were covered in grease and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She had been working for 3 days straight to modify the engines of every civilian ship in the evacuation. The modifications looked like mistakes to anyone who saw them. The jump drives now left quantum signatures that were messy and hard to follow. Most engineers would say the changes made the ships dangerous to fly. But Hee-jin was not most engineers. She was human, and humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to hide was to look broken. Drive modifications complete. "On Transport 7, she called out to her team. "Send them to Bay 12. Her assistant, a young man named Baum, looked confused. "Ma'am, these changes are going to make their jump signatures look completely random." "That's the point," Hee-jin said with a tired smile. "Random means unpredictable. Unpredictable means alive." 3,000 light-years away, the Galactic Fleet was preparing for the battle at Kepler Junction. Admiral Vextar of the Centauri Empire stood on his command ship's bridge, watching the tactical display. His blue skin was pale with worry. "Status report," he ordered. "All ships are in position," his tactical officer replied. "Defensive grid is active. We have 800 ships ready to fight." Admiral Vextar nodded, but he did not feel confident. The last 3 battles against the Void Swarm had been disasters. Each time the alien fleets had used their best tactics and lost anyway. The swarm learned too quickly. "Sir, we're getting reports from human space," the communications officer called out. "It looks like they're abandoning their outer colonies." "Show me." The main screen filled with images from human space. Ships were fleeing from dozens of worlds. The evacuation looked messy and unorganized. Some ships were flying toward the galactic center, others toward the rim. A few seemed to be heading directly toward swarm territory. "Fools," Admiral Vextar muttered. "They're going to get themselves killed." On the planet Carrion, Minji was watching the same reports in the alien command center. The human xenopsychologist had been assigned to observe alien military planning. Most of the alien commanders thought she was there to learn from them. They did not realize she was really there to watch how they thought. Minji had studied alien psychology for 15 years. She knew how different species made decisions under pressure. The Centauri became very careful and followed rules strictly. The hegemony tried to use overwhelming force. The Veltar looked for clever tricks, but only ones that had worked before. All of them thought in straight lines. Cause led to effect. Plans had clear steps. When something went wrong, they tried to fix it the same way they fixed things before. Humans were different. When something went wrong, humans did not just try to fix it. They used the broken thing as a weapon. "Ma'am," an alien technician called out. "We're picking up strange readings from human space. Their ships are leaving quantum signatures we've never seen before." Minji looked at the data on her screen. To the alien eyes, the signatures looked like engine problems, but she recognized Heejin's work immediately. The signatures were not mistakes. They were messages. Back at Frontier Station, the last transport ship was preparing to leave. Do-hyun received a coded message from Taeho. "Begin Phase 2. Lead them where they want to go." Do-hyun smiled grimly. Phase 2 was the most dangerous part of the plan. His ships would have to make contact with swarm scouts and survive long enough to plant false information. The aliens would call it suicide. Humans called it bait. "All ships, this is Captain Do-hyun," he announced on the fleet channel. "Execute dispersal pattern 7. Make it look good." The human evacuation fleet scattered in what looked like complete panic. Some ships flew toward Earth. Others headed for the outer colonies. A few groups seemed to be running toward empty space where they would be easy targets. The swarm detected the fleeing human ships within hours. Their scout vessels moved to investigate, expecting easy prey. But when they tried to track the ships, quantum signatures, something strange happened. The signatures kept changing. Ships that should have been easy to follow simply vanished from sensors. The swarm scouts reported back to the collective mind. The humans were fleeing, but their ships were acting strangely. Some seemed damaged. Others appeared to be carrying valuable cargo. All of them looked vulnerable. The collective mind was pleased. Humans had always been different from other prey, but they were still prey. The scouts were ordered to follow the human ships and report their destinations. At Kepler Junction, the first swarm ships appeared at the edge of the system. Admiral Vextar watched his sensors as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of enemy vessels dropped out of hyperspace. "All ships prepare for battle," he ordered. The battle began exactly as the previous battles had begun. The Galactic Fleet formed defensive lines. The swarm attacked in waves, testing the alien defenses. Both sides followed the same patterns they had used for 2 years. Minji watched the battle reports come in from her position on Sirion. Everything was going exactly as the aliens had planned, which meant everything was going exactly as the swarm expected, which meant the aliens were about to lose. "The human evacuation ships," she said to the alien commander next to her. "Where are they heading?" "Does it matter?" the commander replied. "They're fleeing like cowards while we fight for the galaxy." Minji said nothing, but she pulled up a star chart on her personal tablet. The human ships were not fleeing randomly. When she traced their courses, a pattern began to appear. They were all heading toward specific points in space, points that formed a rough circle around the inner galaxy. Her heart began to race as she realized what she was looking at. The humans were not running away. They were taking positions. At Kepler Junction, the Galactic Fleet was losing. The swarm had learned from the previous battles and was using new tactics. Ships that should have been safe behind the defensive lines were being picked off by swarm units that seemed to know exactly where to attack. "Fall back to secondary positions," Admiral Vextar ordered, but he knew it was too late. The swarm had beaten them again. As the surviving alien ships retreated from Kepler Junction, the swarm collective mind felt satisfaction. Another victory, another step toward consuming the galaxy. The prey species were running out of places to hide, but something nagged at the collective consciousness. The human ships that the scouts had been following were still out there, still running, still acting strangely. The swarm had fought humans before and knew they were dangerous when cornered. But these humans were not fighting. They were just running, unless they were not running at all. The thought came to the collective mind like a cold wind. What if the humans were not fleeing? What if they were positioning themselves for something else? But that was impossible. The humans had been declared insane by their own allies. Their plan had been rejected by every other species. They were acting without support, without backup, without hope. The collective mind dismissed the worry. Insane. Prey was still prey. Soon the swarm would follow the fleeing humans to their destinations and consume them all. The swarm did not know that in the dark space between stars, human ships were already in position. Ships that looked helpless but carried weapons that no one had ever seen before. Ships that were not running away but running toward something. The trap was being set, and for the first time in their long history, the Void Swarm was about to walk into something they could not understand, predict, or adapt to. They were about to face human madness. The Void Swarm fell on human space like a black tide. Their ships moved in perfect formation, following the quantum trails left by the fleeing colony vessels. To the swarm's collective mind, this was going to be the easiest hunt in centuries. The humans were scattered, afraid, and cut off from alien support. They were wrong about everything. From the bridge of the Indomitable, Tejo watched the enemy fleet approach his homeworld of New Sol. The swarm ships moved in the same patterns they had used for millions of years. Organized, efficient, unstoppable. But Tejo was not planning to stop them. He was planning to confuse them. All ships execute harassment pattern Delta, he ordered into his communications device. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids and moons like angry wasps. They struck at the edges of the swarm formation, hitting communication nodes and scout ships, then vanishing before the enemy could respond. Each attack seemed random and desperate, but nothing humans did was ever random. Captain Do-hyun led one of the harassment groups in the rising sun. His orders were simple: hit the enemy, make them angry, then run away, but run away in the right direction. Target their relay ships first, he told his weapons officer. Make them work harder to talk to each other. The rising sun fired a spread of missiles at a swarm communication vessel, then jumped away before return fire could reach them. The attack did little real damage, but it forced the swarm to reroute their communications through other ships. All across human space, similar attacks were happening. Human ships would appear, strike quickly, then disappear. The swarm started to spread their formation, trying to catch the attackers. This made their communications even harder to maintain. On the planet Vega Prime, Admiral Kethmore of the Hegemony watched the battle reports with growing confusion. The humans were fighting, but they were not trying to win. Every attack seemed designed to annoy the enemy rather than hurt them. What are they doing? He asked his tactical officer, a young Centauri named Dexara. I don't know, sir, Dexara replied. It looks like they're just trying to make the swarm angry. That's suicide. An angry swarm is a more dangerous swarm. But on Sarion, Minji was beginning to understand what her people were really doing. She had been studying the attack patterns for hours, and she could see something the aliens missed. Every human strike was forcing the swarm to adapt their formation, and every adaptation made the enemy more spread out and harder to coordinate. They're not trying to hurt them, she whispered to herself. They're trying to teach them. Jiwoo was seeing the same thing from her command center on Luna. The young analyst had access to reports from every human ship in the fleet. When she put all the data together, the pattern became clear. The swarm's greatest strength was their ability to learn and adapt. But humans had figured out how to turn that strength into a weakness. Every harassment attack was designed to teach the swarm the wrong lesson. When humans attacked communication ships, the swarm learned to protect their communications better. This made them use more ships for defense and fewer for attack. When humans hit their formation from the sides, the swarm learned to spread out more. This made it harder for them to coordinate their movements. When humans ran away after each attack, the swarm learned that humans were cowards who could not stand and fight. This made them more aggressive and less careful. Each lesson was true by itself, but together they were preparing the swarm for a battle that would never come. Send a message to Commander Tejo, Jiwoo ordered. Tell him the swarm is adapting. Exactly as predicted. They're ready for Phase 3. The message reached Taeho as his fleet was preparing for another harassment attack. He read it quickly, then smiled for the first time in days. All human forces, this is Commander Taeho, he announced on the secret command channel. Begin withdrawal to the rally points. Make it look desperate. Across human space, the harassment attacks suddenly stopped. Human ships began fleeing deeper into their own territory, broadcasting distress signals and pleas for help. To anyone watching, it looked like the human defense had finally collapsed. The swarm collective mind was pleased. The humans had fought, harder than expected, but in the end they were still just prey. The attacks had been annoying, but they had taught the swarm valuable lessons about human tactics. Now the real hunt could begin. But as the swarm ships pursued the fleeing humans, something strange started to happen. The quantum trails they were following began to act oddly. Ships that should have been easy to track kept disappearing from sensors, only to reappear in unexpected places. Du Hyun was leading one group of fleeing colony ships through the asteroid belt near Mars. His ships were broadcasting panic messages and flying in patterns that looked completely random. But the randomness was carefully planned. Deploy the first network node, he ordered his engineering team. Deep in the cargo hold of the rising sun, Hyojin's latest creation came online. It looked like a standard emergency beacon, the kind ships used when they were in trouble. But this beacon was actually a quantum network relay, designed to work with similar devices hidden throughout the solar system. All across human space, other fleeing ships were deploying their own network nodes. To the swarm, they looked like desperate attempts to call for help, but they were actually building something much more important. The swarm ships followed the human vessels deeper into the inner systems. Their formation had spread out to cover more space, just as the humans had taught them to do. Their communications were routed through multiple backup channels to prevent disruption, just as the humans had taught them to do. They were ready for another harassment campaign. They were ready for desperate last stands. They were ready for every kind of battle that humans had shown them so far. They were not ready for what humans had actually planned. As the first swarm ships entered the Earth system, they detected something unexpected. The quantum signatures they had been following suddenly synchronized. All at once, every human ship in the system began broadcasting the same strange signal. The swarm collective mind tried to analyze the signal, but it was unlike anything they had encountered before. It seemed to be some kind of distress call, but it was coming from everywhere at once. Then the signal changed. Instead of calling for help, it began to do something else. Something that made the collective mind feel a strange emotion it had not experienced in millions of years. Fear. On Luna, Taeho watched the tactical display as red dots began appearing throughout the solar system. Each dot represented a swarm ship that had just lost contact with the collective consciousness. Network. Activation is at 60% and climbing, Jiwoo reported. Isolation effect is working better than expected. Taeho nodded grimly. The trap was working, but the hardest part was still to come. They had cut the swarm off from their collective mind, but individual swarm units were still dangerous. Now came the part where humans had to prove they could fight as well as they could plan. Send the signal to all human fleets, he ordered. Tell them the swarm is blind. Time to show them what we learned from our own madness. Across the galaxy, human ships began to move toward their scattered enemy. But they were not the same humans who had fled in apparent panic. These humans had learned something from their own chaotic tactics. Sometimes the best way to fight an enemy was to become something they could never understand. The Void Swarm arrived at Earth expecting to find a broken world. Their scouts had reported massive human fleet movements toward the home system. Every analysis suggested this would be humanity's final desperate stand. The collective mind prepared for an easy victory. Instead, they found what looked like a gift. Earth hung in space with all its defensive platforms powered down. The great orbital stations that protected humanity's birth world were dark and silent. Ships fled from the planet's surface in obvious panic, broadcasting surrender messages on every frequency. The swarm's collective mind was suspicious. Humans had proven to be tricky prey, But their scout ships detected no hidden fleets, no trap formations, no sign of resistance. Just a defenseless world full of billions of humans ripe for consumption. What the swarm could not see was the command bunker hidden deep beneath Luna's surface. Tejo stood in a room that officially did not exist, watching displays that showed every enemy ship in the solar system. His face was calm, but his hands shook slightly as he gripped the edge of the command table. "Final count?" he asked Jiwoo. 12 million enemy vessels, sir. The largest swarm fleet in recorded history." Tejo nodded. Everything had gone exactly as planned. The enemy had brought their entire force to Earth, thinking they were about to feast on humanity's homeworld. They had no idea they were walking into the center of a web that had been months in the making. "Status of the network?" he asked. "All nodes are active and synchronized," reported Hae Jin from her engineering station. "We have full coverage of the inner system." The network was Hae Jin's masterpiece, built from components that had been scattered throughout human space by the fleeing colony ships. Each piece had looked like standard emergency equipment or random debris, but when activated together, they formed something that had never been tried before on such a scale. Do-hyun's voice crackled through the communication system from his position near Jupiter. "All evacuation ships are in position. Civilian broadcasts are ready." The evacuation ships were another lie. They carried refugees, but they also carried the final components of humanity's trap. As they fled through the solar system, they were actually completing the quantum disruption network that would decide the fate of the galaxy. "Begin the surrender broadcast," Tejo ordered. Across every communication frequency, human voices began to speak. They begged for mercy. They offered to serve the swarm. They provided detailed information about Earth's defenses and population centers. To any listener, it sounded like a broken species giving up hope. The swarm collective mind listened to the broadcasts and felt satisfaction. Finally, the humans were accepting their fate. The collective ordered its ships to move into position around Earth. Soon the feeding would begin. But as millions of swarm vessels moved deeper into the solar system, something began to go wrong. The quantum network that Hae Jin had built was not designed to destroy the enemy ships. It was designed to do something much more devastating. It was designed to make them alone. The first swarm ships to enter the network's range simply stopped responding to commands. Their crews were still alive, their weapons still worked, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in millions of years, individual swarm units found themselves cut off from the collective consciousness. The effect spread like a plague through the enemy fleet. Ship after ship lost contact with the collective mind. Millions of creatures that had never experienced individual thought suddenly found themselves alone in their own heads. Panic spread through the swarm faster than their ships could retreat. The collective mind tried desperately to re-establish contact with the isolated units, but the quantum disruption was too complete. Every ship that entered the network's range became an island of confused consciousness. "Network effectiveness at 97%, Jiwoo reported. "Individual isolation is complete throughout the inner system." Tejo allowed himself a small smile. The trap was working perfectly. But now came the dangerous part. Confused and frightened enemies were sometimes more dangerous than organized ones. All human fleets execute final phase. Show them what we've learned. Hidden throughout the solar system, human battle groups began to move. These were not the same ships that had fled in apparent panic. These vessels had been waiting in the shadows, powered down and invisible, for this exact moment. Do-hyun led the first attack group as they emerged from behind one of Saturn's moons. His target was a cluster of isolated swarm ships that were trying to regroup near the planet's rings. "Remember," he told his crew over the ship's intercom, "they can't coordinate anymore. Each ship is thinking for itself. Use that against them." The human ships attacked in patterns that would have been suicide against an organized enemy. They split up, attacked from multiple directions, and used tactics that made no sense against a unified force. But against confused individual ships, the chaotic human strategy was devastatingly effective. Swarm vessels that had dominated battlefields for millions of years found themselves unable to coordinate their defenses. Ships that tried to help their neighbors left themselves vulnerable to attack. Units that tried to retreat ran into their own allies. The collective mind, still connected to ships outside the disruption field, watched in horror as its most powerful fleet was torn apart by what looked like organized chaos. For the first time in its existence, the swarm was experiencing something it had never known: defeat. On the observation deck of the Galactic Council Station, alien representatives watched the battle reports in stunned silence. Admiral Vextar of the Zentari Empire stood with his mouth open as the displays showed impossible things. "How are they doing this?" he whispered. "The humans are fighting like—" Admiral Kethmore paused, trying to find the words. "Like they're insane." But Minji was watching from the command center on Sirion, and she understood what the aliens could not see. The humans were not fighting like they were insane. They were fighting like the swarm had taught them to fight. Every harassment attack over the past weeks had been designed to learn how individual swarm ships behaved when they were confused or cut off. Every retreat had been a chance to study how the enemy reacted to unexpected tactics. The humans had turned the swarm's own lessons against them. As the battle raged through the solar system, the tide began to turn decisively. Isolated swarm ships, no matter how powerful, could not stand against coordinated human attacks. Some tried to flee, but human ships were waiting at every escape route. Others tried to regroup, but the quantum network made coordination impossible. The Siru, collective mind, desperate to save what remained of its fleet, ordered all ships to retreat from the solar system immediately, but many of the isolated vessels could not even receive the order. They were trapped in their own individual thoughts, unable to connect with the greater consciousness that had guided them for so long. "Sir," Jiwoo reported to Taiho, "we're detecting massive retreat movements. The swarm is pulling back from the inner system." "Let them go," Taiho replied, "but make sure they remember this lesson." As the surviving swarm ships fled Earth's solar system, they carried with them something that had never existed in their species before: individual memories of defeat. Each ship that escaped took with it the knowledge that the collective mind could be wrong, that the swarm could be beaten, that there were things in the universe more dangerous than hunger. The battle for Earth was over. But as Taiho looked at the tactical displays showing scattered enemy forces retreating in all directions, he knew the real war was just beginning. The swarm had learned a new kind of fear. And fear, as any human could tell them, was the most dangerous teacher of all. "Send word to all human fleets," Taiho ordered. "Phase 1 is complete. Prepare for Phase 2. The galaxy would never be the same again." The war ended not with explosions or grand battles, but with silence. Across the galaxy, void swarm ships simply stopped moving. Some hung motionless in deep space. Others drifted toward the galactic rim like lost souls. A few landed on uninhabited worlds and powered down forever. The collective consciousness that had guided them for millions of years was broken. Individual swarm units, cut off from their shared mind, could not remember how to work together. They were no longer a swarm. They were just millions of confused, frightened creatures who had forgotten how to be alone. Taiho stood before the Galactic Council once again, but everything had changed. The same aliens who had called him insane now watched him with careful, fearful eyes. His uniform was the same, but the weight of victory had changed the way he carried himself. "The threat is over," he announced to the assembled representatives. "Swarm activity has ceased in all monitored sectors." The Centauri ambassador, his blue skin pale with shock, leaned forward. "How is this possible? Our best analysts said the Gi swarm could not be defeated." "Your analysts were right," Taiho replied calmly. "The swarm could not be defeated, so we made sure they defeated themselves." In the viewing gallery, Sora watched her former lover address the council. She should have felt proud, but all she felt was worry. The victory had cost more than anyone realized, and the price was written in the lines around Taiho's eyes. The numbers were harsh. Dozens of human colonies had been sacrificed as bait. Thousands of ships had been lost in the chaotic fighting. Entire families had died maintaining the deception that allowed the trap to work. Du Hyun had returned from the outer systems the day before. but he spent his time in the memorial gardens instead of celebrating. He carried the names of every crew member who had died following his orders, heroes whose sacrifice would never be known outside the human military. The evacuation ships, Do-hyun had told Sora quietly. Some of them weren't evacuating at all. They were volunteers. Families who knew they were flying into danger so their children might have a future. The technical details of the victory were equally troubling. Hye-jin had presented her report to the Council's Science Committee, but her explanation only made the aliens more nervous. The quantum disruption network was not just a weapon. It was proof that humans could think in ways that even advanced computers found unpredictable. We didn't invent new technology, Hye-jin had explained to the committee. We just used existing technology in ways no one had thought of before. That was the problem. Every species in the galaxy had access to the same quantum physics principles, but only humans had thought to use them to isolate individual consciousness from collective thought. The implications were terrifying. Ji-woo had been promoted to head of strategic analysis, but her new job was not celebrating victory. She spent her days preparing for what might come next, because there would be a next time. The galaxy was full of dangers, and now everyone knew that humans had solutions to impossible problems. The other species are scared of us now, she had told Taeho during their last briefing. They're grateful, but they're also afraid. What happens when they decide we're too dangerous to trust? Minji's final report to the Xenological Committee was classified at the highest levels, but copies had somehow reached every major government in the galaxy. Her conclusion was simple and frightening. Humans did not just think differently from other species. They thought in ways that even they did not fully understand. Human strategy appears to emerge from controlled chaos, she had written. They make plans that look insane until they succeed. They solve problems by creating bigger problems that somehow cancel out the original issue. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to do this instinctively. The report had been quietly filed away, but every alien leader had read it, and every alien leader was now asking the same question. What else were humans capable of? As Sora prepared for her new role as Earth's first representative to the Galactic Security Council, she received a private message from Taeho. His words were simple, but heavy with meaning. They think we're dangerous now. They're right. But they're also under our protection, whether they know it or not. The message made her think of an old Earth saying, "With great power comes great responsibility." Humans now had the power to solve impossible problems, but they also had the responsibility to use that power wisely. The victory celebration on Earth lasted for weeks, but Taeho did not attend. He spent his time in his office reading reports and preparing for the next crisis. Because he knew better than anyone that the galaxy was not a safe place, and peace was just the time between wars. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Ji-woo entered with a fresh set of reports in her hands. "What is it this time?" he asked. "The hegemony has requested a meeting about their border disputes with the Veltar Confederacy. Both sides are asking for human mediation." Taeho almost smiled. "They want us to solve their problems now." "It gets worse," Ji-woo continued. "The Centauri Empire has asked for consultation on their plague situation. Apparently their best scientists can't figure out how to stop it, so they want to know if we have any creative solutions." "And the Andorian Republic? They want to hire human tactical advisors for their military. They say they need people who can think outside conventional parameters." Taeho leaned back in his chair. The galaxy that had once called humans crazy now wanted to learn from their madness. It would have been funny if it were not so dangerous. "Schedule the meetings," he said finally. "But make sure they understand the rules. We help because we choose to help, not because we have to. And we solve problems our way, not theirs." "Yes, sir. There's one more thing." "What?" Ji-woo hesitated before speaking. "Intelligence reports suggest that some alien governments are trying to study our tactical methods. They want to learn how to think like humans." Taeho was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Earth's rebuilt cities. In the distance, construction crews were building new defensive platforms just in case. "Let them try," he said quietly. Thinking like a human isn't something you can learn from a book. It's something you have to be. Outside his window, children played in parks that existed because their parents had been willing to risk everything for an impossible victory. Ships launched from spaceports carrying explorers and traders to worlds that were safe because humans had refused to accept that some problems could not be solved. The galaxy was at peace, but it was not the same galaxy that had existed before, the war. The void swarm was gone, but something else had taken its place as the thing that other species feared and respected. Humanity had saved everyone by proving they were willing to do what no one else would do. They had won by being more than brave, more than clever, more than determined. They had won by being human, and that, as every species in the galaxy now understood, was the most dangerous thing of all. In the end, they had called it madness. But humans had called it strategy. And in a universe full of impossible problems, sometimes the difference between madness and genius was simply a matter of who was left standing when the battle was over. The humans were still standing, and the galaxy would never be the same.